When my little boy was at his sickest, my parents, the people who raised me, flat out refused to help. What they said still haunts me. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily. I'm in my late 20s, and I'm a single mom to the sweetest boy, Lucas. He's only 6 years old, and not long ago, he came down with pneumonia. The fever wouldn't break, his little chest rattled with every breath, and I felt completely helpless. I was working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and every minute away from him broke me more. Still, I had to keep going, because the bills weren't going to stop. The nights were the hardest. I'd rush home after a shift, find Lucas pale and weak, and pray he'd get better. His eyes would follow me around the room, tired but trusting, and all I wanted was to sit by his side. But if I didn't work, I couldn't pay for his medicine. Finally, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. Mark and Diane weren't perfect parents when I was growing up, but I thought maybe now, as grandparents, they'd step up. I asked them if they could watch Lucas for a few hours here and there, just so I could keep my shifts and stay on top of his care. I'll never forget the silence that came first, then my mother's voice. She sighed and said, "Emily, we've already raised our kids. We're done with that. You chose to have a child, so it's your responsibility, not ours." My father agreed, adding, "You need to stop expecting us to fix your problem." It felt like someone punched me in the chest. These were the same parents I'd cooked for and cared for when I was barely a teenager because they were too busy doting on my younger brother. The same parents I defended in front of teachers when people questioned why I came to school tired and hungry. And now, when their grandson was sick, they turned their backs on him as if he were nothing. I begged them, tears running down my face, but they were unmoved. My mom even said, "Don't make us the bad guys, Emma. You should have thought about this before you decided to have him." I hung up the phone shaking, staring at my little boy sleeping in the next room, his body so small under the blankets. That was the moment something inside me broke. I realized I couldn't count on them. Not for me, not for Lucas. They made their choice clear, and I knew I had to make mine. I promised myself right then that I would never let my son feel unloved, no matter how hard it got for me. And I also knew that someday, the weight of what they refused to do would come back to them. I waited, hoping my parents would change their minds, but their tone only grew sharper. My dad leaned back in his chair and said flatly, "We already did our job. We raised our kids. We're not starting over." My mom nodded along, arms crossed, as if the conversation was an inconvenience. Hearing that made my stomach twist. I wasn't asking them to raise Lucas, only to sit with him while I worked, to make sure he wasn't alone when he could barely keep his eyes open. Instead, they looked at me like I was trying to hand off a burden. Then came the words that cut the deepest. My mother said, "He's not our problem. You made your choices, Emily. Now you need to handle them." I froze, staring at her, waiting for even the smallest sign of compassion, but there was none. My dad turned on the TV as if the discussion was over. I felt like a little girl again, invisible, silenced, desperate for kindness that never came. Memories came rushing back. Nights when I cooked dinner for my brother while my parents went out, mornings when I packed his lunch because they couldn't be bothered. I was only a kid myself, but I picked up the slack without question. I thought that counted for something, that maybe, one day, they'd appreciate how much I had done. Instead, they acted as though none of it mattered. The people I had carried through their own neglect now shrugged off my son, as though he was a stranger. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and for a second I thought I might collapse right there. I left their house without another word, gripping my car keys so hard they dug into my palm. Driving back to Lucas, I couldn't stop hearing their voices. "Not our problem." The words repeated over and over, heavy and cruel, echoing louder than the hum of the road beneath my tires. When I finally walked through my door and saw Lucas curled up on the couch, his little body weak, I nearly broke. He looked up at me with tired eyes, and I forced a smile so he wouldn't see the storm inside me. He didn't deserve to feel the sting of rejection that I had known my whole life. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted. The bond one once thought existed between me and my parents was gone. Whatever love I believed they had for me, or for my son, had just been proven an illusion. The days blurred together as I juggled double shifts and sleepless nights. I ran from one job to the next, barely pausing to eat, fueled only by coffee and the fear of falling behind on bills. Every time I came home, my body ached so badly it felt like my bones were splintering under my own weight. Still, I pushed forward because Lucas needed me. One night, after finishing a late shift, I dragged myself up the stairs to our apartment. My vision swam, and for a moment the hallway spun so violently I had to grab the railing to steady myself. My legs trembled, and I thought I might collapse right there. Somehow, I made it inside, leaning against the door as I tried to catch my breath. My whole body felt hollow, like I was running on fumes. Lucas was awake, curled under a blanket on the couch. His cheeks were flushed, his breathing shallow, and when he saw me, his little eyes filled with worry instead of relief. He whispered, "Mom, you look sick." Hearing that from him almost broke me. I sat beside him, brushing the damp hair from his forehead, telling him I was fine, even though my hands shook from fatigue. Then he asked the question I never wanted to hear. His voice was so small I almost didn't catch it. "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa love me?" The words sliced through me sharper than any insult, sharper than any rejection I had ever endured. He wasn't angry, just quietly puzzled, trying to make sense of something no child should have to wonder. My throat closed up, and for a long moment I couldn't answer. I wanted to protect him from the truth, to shield him from the cruelty I had grown up with, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. I pulled him close, holding his fragile body against mine. My eyes burned, but I didn't let the tears fall. I whispered that he was loved, more than he could ever imagine, and that I would always be there for him. I promised him safety, warmth, and care, even if no one else stood by us. When he finally drifted off to sleep, I sat there in the dim light, staring at the wall. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms until they hurt. Inside, I made a vow, silent but unshakable. I would never forgive what had been done to him, to us. The night my parents turned their backs on my sick child was carved into me like a scar, and I swore I would carry that memory for the rest of my life. That betrayal would not be forgotten. I sat awake long after Lucas had fallen asleep, my body drained, but my mind restless. The sound of his uneven breathing filled the small room, and in that stillness, memories I had buried for years began to resurface. I didn't want to think about them, but they came anyway, sharp and vivid, refusing to let me rest. I was 12 the first time I realized my parents weren't going to step up. I was only 6 then, full of energy, always getting into things. Mom would disappear into her room for hours, and Dad spent most evenings in the garage or at the bar. That left me to handle Kyle. Homework, meals, baths, even calming him down when he had nightmares. I cooked grilled cheese on a stool because I wasn't tall enough to reach the stove, wiping his face with the corner of my shirt because no one else bothered. Back then, I told myself it was temporary, that they were just busy or tired, that things would get better. But the years kept rolling on and nothing changed. Kyle grew older, and so did I, but somehow I was still the one filling their shoes while they praised themselves for being hardworking parents. What stung even more was how differently they treated the two of us. Kyle could do no wrong. If he got in trouble at school, they laughed it off. If I brought home straight A's, they nodded and said, "That's what we expect from you." My mom used to pat Kyle's head and call him her golden boy. Then she'd glance at me and say, "Emily's the tough one. She doesn't need anything." Those words stuck. I learned early that showing I was tired or hurt didn't matter, because they had already decided I could handle it. I became the invisible child, the reliable one, the one who didn't need help. And Kyle, he was showered with affection and excuses, the center of their attention while I carried responsibilities that weren't mine. Sitting in the quiet now, watching over my own son, I felt that same old ache crawl back into my chest. It was like time folding in on itself, the patterns repeating all over again. Only this time, it wasn't me they were overlooking, it was Lucas. They had dismissed him just as easily as they dismissed me, writing him off because it was inconvenient to care. My little boy, who had done nothing but love them, was brushed aside like he didn't count. The very same way they pushed me into the shadows while holding Kyle up as their pride. Realization settled like ice in my stomach. They hadn't changed. They hadn't grown. The selfishness that had defined my childhood was alive and thriving, and now my son was suffering the same kind of rejection. The pain I thought I had left behind had found its way back, only sharper, because this time it wasn't just me, it was him. And I couldn't let history keep repeating. It was a Sunday afternoon when the news reached me, carried casually by a neighbor who had no idea what her words would stir inside me. I was coming back from the pharmacy with another bottle of cough syrup for Lucas when Mrs. Peterson from down the street stopped me with her usual chatty smile. "I saw your mom at church this morning," she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. She was talking about how much she adores her grandson. "You're lucky, Emily. Not every child has such doting grandparents." I froze, the bag of medicine cutting into my hand. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Mrs. Peterson went on, oblivious. "Oh yes," she spoke so proudly. "Said she's a wonderful grandmother, always there when you need her." Everyone was just nodding and saying how sweet that was. Something in me snapped. I forced a polite smile until she walked away, but inside I was burning. My mother hadn't stepped foot in my apartment for months. She hadn't called to ask about Lucas, hadn't offered a ride to the doctor, hadn't even sent a card when he was bedridden. And yet, she stood in a room full of people, painting herself as some saint of a grandmother. I could picture her perfectly, her hand resting over her heart, her voice soft and modest, pretending to be the pillar of family devotion. People would believe her too. They always had. She knew how to spin words, how to present herself as generous and caring, while behind closed doors she let others carry the weight. The hypocrisy hit me like a punch. I thought about Lucas lying on the couch, cheeks flushed from fever, asking me why his grandparents didn't love him. That image clashed violently with the one my mother had painted for the world to see. The lie of it made my jaw tighten until it hurt. I wanted to storm into that church and rip the mask from her face, to shout the truth so everyone would know. But I didn't. Instead, I walked back into my apartment, set the bag down, and sat in silence while my hands shook. Anger settled deep in my chest, heavier than anything I had carried before. Not just because she had lied, but because she had stolen something that didn't belong to her, the title of a loving grandmother. She had paraded around with pride she hadn't earned, while I sat awake at night wondering how to keep my child comfortable through his sickness. That was the moment the thought first entered my mind. I didn't want to scream or fight or beg for acknowledgement anymore. I wanted something colder, quieter. Revenge. Not the kind that made a scene, but the kind that left no doubt about who truly cared and who didn't. And once that seed was planted, I knew it would grow. One evening there was a knock at my door, unexpected and hesitant. I opened it to find Kyle standing there, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and worry. We hadn't spoken much over the years. Distance had grown between us, partly because of how differently our parents had treated us. But that night, something in his eyes told me this wasn't a casual visit. "I heard about Lucas," he said softly, almost like he was afraid to overstep. "Can I come in?" I let him inside, though part of me was tense, unsure of what he wanted. Lucas was curled up on the couch, his blanket pulled to his chin, his skin pale against the dim lamp light. Kyle's gaze landed on him, and his whole face changed. Shock, sadness, maybe even shame. He crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from Lucas's forehead. "He looks so weak," Kyle whispered. Then he turned to me. "Why didn't Mom and Dad step in?" The question hit me like a stone. I didn't know whether to laugh bitterly or cry. "Because they don't care," I said flatly, my voice sharper than I meant. "They said he's not their responsibility." Kyle's mouth fell open. For a long time he didn't speak, just sat on the edge of the couch staring at Lucas. Finally, he said, "I knew they were selfish, but this? He's their grandson." His voice cracked on the word. Something in me softened then. For so long I had carried the weight of their rejection alone, certain no one else would understand. Hearing him say it out loud, seeing the horror on his face, was like a crack opening in the wall I had built. "I want to help," he said suddenly, straightening his shoulders. "Whatever you need, rides, groceries, sitting with him when you have to work. You shouldn't be doing this by yourself." The word stunned me. Kyle had always been the favored one, the one shielded while I bore the burden. But now here he was offering to share the load. I studied him carefully, half expecting him to backtrack, but his eyes stayed steady. He meant it. That night he stayed while I ran out to pick up supplies. When I came back, Lucas was sitting up, giggling faintly at one of Kyle's silly impressions. It had been weeks since I'd seen that spark in his face, and the sight almost undid me. As the days went on, Kyle kept showing up. He'd bring soup, fold laundry, even sit by Lucas's side reading picture books in his uneven voice. Slowly, the distance between us shrank. We talked in hushed tones after Lucas fell asleep, about childhood, about how blind we'd both been to the cracks in our family. For the first time, I felt like he saw me, not just as the sister who carried everything, but as someone who had been left behind too. And in those moments, I realized something important. I wasn't as alone as I had believed. The phone rang one afternoon while I was folding laundry. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. My parents. For weeks there had been silence from them, no visits, no questions about Lucas, nothing but the echo of their refusal. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. I pressed answer. My father's voice came first, gruff but strangely upbeat. "Emily, your mother and I have been talking. We think it's time we start planning for the future." I stayed quiet, waiting. Then my mother chimed in, her tone syrupy, rehearsed. "We're not getting any younger, sweetheart. Retirement's around the corner, and we'll need someone dependable to help manage things. Naturally, we thought of you." I almost dropped the phone. Of me. The same daughter they left drowning when her child was sick. They continued as if they hadn't just insulted me months before. My father cleared his throat. "You've always been strong. Independent. We know you'll make sure we're taken care of, doctor appointments, bills, all that. It's only right, after everything we did raising you." The words hit like sparks to dry tinder. After everything we did raising you. Images flashed through my mind. Nights alone with Kyle while they disappeared, meals I cooked as a child because no one else bothered, and most recently, their refusal to sit with Lucas when he was too weak to stand. I felt laughter bubbling up, harsh and bitter, before I could stop it. It startled them. "What's funny?" my mother snapped. I steadied my voice, though the bitterness laced every word. You really think I owe you? That I should drop everything to play caretaker, because you fed me and kept a roof over my head? That's the bare minimum, not a favor. And when I needed you the most, when your grandson needed you, you couldn't even show up. There was silence on the other end. I could hear my father breathing heavily, like he was working up to an argument. My mother muttered something about gratitude, about how children are supposed to honor their parents. But all I could do was shake my head and let another sharp laugh escape. Gratitude. Honor. The hypocrisy was almost too much. They abandoned me when I begged for help, and now, with their comfort on the line, they had the audacity to demand devotion. I ended the call before they could say more, my hands trembling but my chest oddly light. For once, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations. For once, I wasn't the obedient daughter nodding along while swallowing the pain. That moment crystallized everything. They had shown me exactly where I stood in their lives, useful only when they needed something. And in return, I knew exactly what role they would play in mine. None. After hanging up on them, I sat in the quiet, the phone still buzzing faintly in my hand. Their voices echoed in my ears, demanding loyalty, demanding service, as if my entire life was just preparation to keep them comfortable. But instead of anger boiling over like before, something inside me hardened into resolve. They had asked for my devotion, but what they had truly given me was freedom. I decided, in that very moment, that I would never give them what they expected. Not my time, not my money, not my energy. They had already shown me where I ranked in their hearts, and now I would show them where they ranked in mine. So I started planning quietly, without fanfare. Every extra dollar I made, I tucked away into a separate account, one meant for Lucas's future. It wasn't much at first, but watching that balance grow, even by small amounts, felt like power I had carved out of chaos. That account became my secret form of revenge, proof that I would invest in my son's life, not in the comfort of the people who abandoned him. Kyle noticed the changes too. He began stopping by after work, bringing groceries or sitting with Lucas so I could catch up on sleep. Sometimes we'd talk late into the night, and he admitted how ashamed he felt for not seeing the truth about our parents sooner. His support was like a lifeline I didn't know I needed. For years, I thought I had to carry everything alone. Now, with him by my side, the burden felt lighter. With his help, I was able to pick up a few extra hours here and there, slowly stacking away more savings. We worked together on small projects around my apartment, fixing leaky faucets, patching old furniture, even repainting Lucas's room a cheerful blue. Each change, each step forward, was a reminder that I was building something solid, something my parents could never touch. And the more I focused on Lucas, the stronger I felt. Watching him recover, seeing color return to his cheeks, hearing his laughter again, it fueled me in a way no amount of bitterness could. His smile became my compass, guiding me through the exhaustion and the doubts. The betrayal that once left me crushed began to shift into something else. It no longer dragged me down, it pushed me upward. Every cruel word they had spoken, every cold dismissal, became another reason to work harder, to prepare better, to ensure my son grew up surrounded by the kind of love I had always craved. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to scream or demand apologies. My revenge would be quiet, steady, undeniable. It would be the life I built for Lucas, a life filled with security, joy, and warmth. A life where my parents would have no place, no benefit, no control. And for the first time, I felt powerful. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and buttered rolls, the kind of meal my mother always prepared when she wanted to impress. Relatives filled the table, chatting and laughing, while I sat stiff in my chair, aware that my parents had orchestrated this gathering. Kyle sat beside me, his expression guarded, as if he too was waiting for the real reason we'd been summoned. The moment came when the plates were nearly empty and the conversation had slowed. My mother set down her fork, folded her hands neatly, and looked directly at me. "Emily," she began, her voice soft but deliberate, "we're not getting younger. We'd like to know we can rely on you when the time comes. After all, we've always been there for family." The words made Kyle shift uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I felt every eye at the table turn toward me, waiting for my answer. My father gave a small nod, as if sealing the request, confident I'd oblige. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "You've always been there for family?" I repeated, my tone cutting through the silence. My mother frowned, flustered by my reaction. "Yes, of course. Don't twist my words. We just want to make sure we're cared for when the time comes. It's what children do for their parents." That was it. The dam inside me broke. I set my napkin down and leaned forward, my voice steady but cold. "Do you remember the night Lucas was burning with fever, too weak to lift his head? Do you remember when I begged you to help me, just for a few hours, and you told me he wasn't your problem?" The table went silent. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father looked down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. I didn't let them escape. You stopped being parents the day you turned your back on my child, I said clearly, each word slicing through the heavy air. That was the moment you made your choice. Don't stand here years later asking me to sacrifice for you when you couldn't lift a finger for him. Gasps rippled from a few relatives. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. My uncle stared at his glass of water, but no one dared interrupt. Kyle reached out under the table, giving my hand a quick squeeze, silent support that steadied me. My mother tried again, her voice trembling this time. You're being cruel, Emily. You don't understand how hard it is. I cut her off. No. What's cruel is a sick little boy wondering why his grandparents don't love him. What's cruel is demanding loyalty after proving you don't deserve it. Silence fell heavy and final. My parents had nothing left to say. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had spoken the truth out loud, and no one could take it back. Years passed, and time revealed the cracks my parents thought they could hide. Their hair turned gray, their bodies slowed, and with each passing year, they found themselves more alone. Calls came less frequently, until eventually they stopped altogether, not because I reached out, but because they grew tired of hearing my silence. Neighbors whispered that my father's back gave him trouble, that my mother struggled to walk long distances. They had expected a dutiful daughter to step in, but no one came. Meanwhile, my own world transformed. Lucas grew strong again, the sickness that once terrified me nothing more than a memory. His cheeks glowed with health, his laughter filled every corner of our home, and watching him run through the park was proof of how far we'd come. I managed to climb out of the grind of endless shifts, saving carefully until I secured a stable job that provided both comfort and pride. Bills no longer crushed me. Fear no longer dictated every choice. Kyle remained by our side through it all. He became more than just my brother. He became family in the truest sense, the kind that shows up without being asked, the kind that repairs what was once broken. Lucas adored him, and the bond they built filled the hole my parents had left. Together, we created a circle of love and trust that made their absence feel like no loss at all. Every now and then, word reached me of my parents' struggles. Someone mentioned they were looking into retirement homes, but costs were high. Another time I overheard that they were asking distant cousins for help. Each story confirmed what I already knew. The safety net they expected me to be had unraveled. They had woven that fate themselves, stitch by stitch, the day they turned their backs on my son. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't need to confront them again, didn't need to shout or argue. My revenge was in the quiet satisfaction of living a life they could never claim credit for. My strength came not from bitterness, but from building something beautiful in spite of them. One evening, after a long day, I tucked Lucas into bed. His hair had grown thick and messy, his eyes sparkling with the kind of happiness I once thought impossible. As he settled under the blankets, I leaned down, pressing my lips to his forehead. My voice was a whisper, but it carried all the weight of my promise. I'll always fight for you. Always. You'll never have to wonder if you're loved. He smiled drowsily, drifting toward sleep, safe in the certainty of my word. I sat there for a moment, watching him breathe, and felt a calm settle over me. My parents had failed me, and they had failed him, but their choices no longer defined us. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting them off, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.